Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this is a series I do here in two different forms. First of all, this is available as a video visual podcast here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. If you'd like something that has a little bit of a visual component where sometimes there might be a little bit of show and tell, and there's going to be, of course, articles that I'm going to be covering and recapping on here that you all would be able to see. This is also available like an actual audio-only podcast, so you can take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to. Simply look up ModChat, all one word, on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should hopefully be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it's available on most of them. Either way, ModChat is my podcast where I come on here at least once a month and I talk to you all about whatever I find interesting, new, things that I want to discuss, things that I just overall think are cool and I want to talk about, and maybe even show a little bit in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. Now, as you can see, I'm not showing up on camera for this here, at least. Honestly, just didn't want to bust out the camera, but I did want to get to these topics here, so I thought it'd be fun to jump over to that. Now, this here is a little bit of an old topic at this point, but I did want to at least recap this a little bit because there have been some new updates. So about 2 episodes ago, I believe, I did cover that there was a new kernel exploit that was available for the PlayStation 4, which was also combined with a new entry point being PPPwn. It ended up using a old, like something from like 2006, it ended up using a old vulnerability on the Ethernet port on the PlayStation 4, and it works up to firmware 11.00. Well, at that point, the jailbreak, so to speak, had not fully been released just because we had the exploit out. We were able to chain load it together. We were able to chain the entry point with the kernel exploit. We were also able to run some payloads, but the main payload that everyone was waiting for was some kind of hen payload, which ended up being GoldHEN, and that finally ended up being released. It was at the time 2.4 beta 17, and the biggest thing here was that it supported firmware 11.00 via the PPPwn exploit. This was at the beginning of May, so there have been a few updates to this. But here, in short, it's asking what is GoldHEN for PS4. GoldHEN is a homebrew enabler for the PS4, packed with features. For all intents and purposes, you can think of it as a PS4 custom firmware. It offers in particular a remote package installer, an FTP server, and a bin loader, meaning it's pretty much the only thing you need to load when you jailbreak your PS4 to have a lot of options at your disposal. And that is the nice thing with GoldHEN. GoldHEN is not the only jailbreak or the only jailbreak payload, but it is the one that people look out for because as opposed to running a whole bunch of different payloads for, let's say, a homebrew enabler, debug settings, UART, firmware, blocking, FTP server, instead of running payloads for all that, you just run GoldHEN and that's it. So for anybody who's newer to jailbroken PlayStation 4s, you might be thinking, okay, that's normal, what's the big deal? But if you've been in the jailbreak PS4 scene for a while, my first one was a PS4 on 1.76. It is so much nicer being able to just load one payload and pretty much be done because it does most of what you want. Either way, the jailbreak, the kernel exploit, and the payloads have still been consistently getting updated because stability was a bit of an issue with PPPwn. Not only it came out originally as a Python script, but then there was UI tools that were coming out for it. Then the C++ rewrite ended up coming out, so now people say that if you run the C++ variant of it as opposed to the Python script, it seems to be more stable. But one thing that was also a big hindrance for this was there was actually PlayStation 4s that were not compatible with PPPwn. It was something with the actual systems themselves, like specific motherboards and specific types of PlayStation 4s. It mostly came down to, like, again, specific motherboard revisions, but some of them just flat out did not work with PPPwn. However, it has ended up getting updated here, which this was exciting to see as well too. Over on Lololo, they say the PPPwn exploit is the latest and greatest jailbreak for the PlayStation 4. It's proven since its release to be a reliable exploit and got better with time, especially after C++ ports made it really fast. Also, because of how it interacts with the internet connection, it can basically be launched at the console startup, making it a truly good exploit for anyone looking to jailbreak their PS4. Except for the few who seem to have PS4 models that weren't compatible at all with the exploit until now, with PPPwn always failing for them in one of the early stages of the exploit. This major but hard to find issue has apparently been fixed yesterday. The Flow has pushed an update to the official PPPwn GitHub repository, with thanks to Boris TA for debugging the issue. It is not clarified in the commit message if Boris TA provided the actual fix or debug logs to help understand the issue. The issue was apparently a fake IPv6 address which turned out to be invalid and flagged as such on some specific network chipsets. Fixing that address now resolves that one issue. So that's all to say now at this point that if you had a quote-unquote cursed PlayStation 4, it looks like not only compatibility is better, but it seems that hopefully all PlayStation 4 revisions, as long as they're on firmware 11.00 or lower, can run PPPwn, which is awesome to see here. Now, I have talked about those cursed PlayStation 4s. I talked about firmware 11. I talked about PPPwn. I talked about the rewrite here. However, there's a subset of people who are on lower firmwares that either don't want to update or can't update for whatever reason. One of the big reasons for not updating is if you have a noBD PS4. What that means is you either don't have a Blu-ray drive or there's something wrong with your Blu-ray drive, and much like the PlayStation 3, if you try to update it with an official firmware update and your Blu-ray drive is not connected or it is not working, you cannot successfully update your system. Unfortunately, there is a hardware check that happens, and it still happens on the PlayStation 4. Well, the original PlayStation 4 hen that people talk about, and this isn't even the original one from what I know, this is a revision or kind of a fork of it, so to speak. It has a few other features of what I'm trying to say, but this was kind of like GoldHEN before GoldHEN was a thing. PS4 hen VTX has been ported to multiple PS4 firmwares as a temporary solution until GoldHEN gets there. So covering this here, again on Wololo, they state that developer Echo Stretch, along with Best Pig, has been porting and releasing PS4 hen VTX to multiple firmwares for the recent PS4 jailbreak. The developer says this is a temporary measure for folk who want or have to stay on their current firmware and if GoldHEN isn't available for them. This is under active development, and fixes updates are being added almost every day by the developer. Now, why a homebrew enabler for all firmwares is a good thing. He states here that popular CFW GoldHEN has been ported to multiple new firmwares for the PS4, so following the release of the latest PS4 jailbreak on firmwares 11 and below. But developer Sistro is only human, and has to prioritize some firmwares over others with each release. Now in theory, with GoldHEN now available on multiple firmwares, 9.60, 10.0, 10.01, and 11 were added recently, on top of course of 9.00 and several firmwares before that. One could say that it is okay to update to the next supported firmware and call it a day. For many reasons, some people won't or can't upgrade to another firmware. In particular, some folks are stuck on a given firmware and cannot upgrade their consoles due to the noBD issue. And here it is explained here, stating your PS4 is set to be noBD if its Blu-ray drive is missing or has been damaged. If you have such a noBD console, you probably already know or will soon discover that you cannot update your PS4 firmware anymore. This is annoying for multiple reasons, if only for the fact that there is no legit technical reason for this limitation on the PS4 firmware. You could still technically use the PS4 for a lot of other things, including digital game downloads, but the PlayStation gods have decided otherwise. It's up to the community to fix this mess and make it technically possible to update your firmware to the latest and greatest by bypassing a few checks during installation of the firmware. These techniques are typically referred to as noBD updaters, and they state here adding a kernel exploit for lower firmwares gives users additional ways to eventually upgrade their console if they need to. This is just one of the benefits of porting a given exploit to multiple firmwares. So even covering this here, they state that PS4 hen Vortex is, and this is, I'm glad this was confirmed because this is what I was thinking, it was kind of in the back of my head, but they say that VTX here stands for Vortex, who is the original developer. As far as I know, PS4 hen Vortex was actually the base for GoldHEN, and so even though GoldHEN has evolved significantly since the VTX day, many of the features are similar. You can also see here that there's been a lot of firmwares that this has been ported for. So 7.55, 9.03, 10.50, 10.71, 11 of course. And you'll see the features here being a homebrew enabler, jailbreak, sandbox escape, debug settings, external hard drive support, VR support, remote package install, rest mode support, external hard drive format to 7.xx support, firmware version spoof to 7.02. I think these two are kind of outdated. I think these two just need to be updated. And not on here. I think probably just like on the article itself. So I don't think they would spoof to a lower firmware version is what I'm saying. UART enabler, never disable screenshot, remote play enabler. So the nice thing is here, you don't just get a homebrew enabler, because that would have just been PS4 hen and that's it, but you get all these other things. So like I said here, some of these settings were not always available in one package, like UART enabler, never disable screenshot, external hard drive support. Just some of these features were not there. So PS4 hen Vortex, it's a pretty good solution here. It's stable, it's open source, and doesn't have as many features as GoldHEN. However, it has just enough features where if you have to run PS4 hen Vortex, you might just need a few other payloads and you should be good to continue on. So this is nice for people who, again, either don't want to update their firmware or cannot update their firmware. Now, there's been a myriad of different solutions in order to get your PlayStation 4 into a jailbroken state using PPPwn. Like I said, it was originally a Python script. There's now UIs that are out there where you can just load up the Python script, load up your payload and run it. There's a C++ rewrite. I've even seen you can use a smart TV to quite literally like install, essentially like run it, install like a package on that smart TV and then use that to jailbreak your PS4. But I think this one here by Stooge will be more attainable for many people out there. This is called PyPwn, and in short, they state here, this is a script to set up PPPwn and PPPwn C++ on the Raspberry Pi and run GoldHEN on the PS4 firmware 11, 10.01, 10.00, 9.60, and 9.00. It also supports internet access after Pwn and access to FTP, kernel logs, and bin loader servers launched by GoldHEN. A DNS blocker is also installed and used to prevent updates. The Raspberry Pi 4, Pi 400, and Pi 5 can pass through a USB drive inserted into the Pi to the console if the Pi is plugged into the console USB port. That's a nice feature there because you do need a USB drive to essentially copy the GoldHEN payload to the PS4 itself. There's also a web server to control the Pi, change settings, and send payloads by accessing pppwn.local from the console or your PC if you have internet access enabled. So far, they've tested a few devices here, and it looks like this is all the way from the Pi 2 all the way up to the Pi 5, both of the Raspberry Pi Zeros, the Rock Pi 4C Plus, the Big Tree Tech BTT Pi version 1.2, and the PC Duino 3B. Some people might be wondering if the Raspberry Pi Pico would be supported on here, but they are both very different devices. Keep in mind, the Raspberry Pi itself, the main one, is going to be more of a PC, while as the Raspberry Pi Pico is essentially a microcontroller. So they're both great devices, but they have very separate use cases. So if you have just a Pico and you're asking, well, why can this run on the Pico? Most likely not. If you're looking for a cost-effective measure, get an older Pi, get like a Pi 0W or Pi 02W, and hopefully you should be okay on there. But either way, the Raspberry Pi is a favorite device of many inside and outside of the console modding community. So if you're wanting to use a Raspberry Pi to kind of keep your PS4 offline, save her from updates, and also kind of give it a little more of a controlled environment to be jailbroken, well, PyPwn seems to be pretty great for this. We're about to get into a whole lot of N64 stuff that I've seen has been pretty cool. This has been coming out since last month here, but right here we see that there's been a new static recompiler tool called N64 Recomp, which aims to, as they state here, seamlessly modernize N64 games. And this is from Chari or Krista Norin over on GBA Temp. And they state here, as each year passes, retro games become harder and harder to play, as the physical media begins to fall apart and becomes more difficult and expensive to obtain. The onward marching of time and evolution of technology also means that video games that were once landmark titles in their day are thought of now as clunky, awkward, or just not viable by today's standards. These reasons are why so many individuals have dedicated years of their lives to reverse engineering beloved video games, combining their efforts to create decompilations that allow for classic games to be experienced in new ways, on new technology, with new features and improvements that were never possible on original hardware or through emulation. These decompilation projects take massive amounts of effort, however. For example, one such undertaking for The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask has been worked on since early 2021, and after years of steady, painstaking progress is still not yet ready for release. A new piece of software might be a big game changer in that department, though. A modder by the name of Mr. Wiseguy quietly released 2 projects, one of which is titled Zelda 64 Recompiled, which can play The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask with numerous modern-day features, including support for autosaves, ultra-wide resolutions, high frame rates, gyro aiming, custom textures, and more. All this can be utilized by downloading his release of Zelda 64 Recompiled and providing your own legal cart dump of Majora's Mask. According to Mr. Wise Guy, this project was made using a tool he created, N64 Recomp. It is a static recompiler for N64 games that can turn N64 binaries into C code, and then be compiled into a platform of your choosing. By using N64 Recomp, the modder was able to create recompilations of Nintendo 64 games that lack decompilations, such as Rocket Robot on Wheels, Banjo-Kazooie, and Superman 64. I know we were all waiting for that one. A highly detailed breakdown of the process is explained down below. I will read into this here saying the recompiler works by accepting a list of symbols and metadata alongside the binary, with the goal of splitting the input binary into functions that are each individually recompiled into a C function, named according to the metadata. So this is cool to see overall here, where I'm liking seeing different methods available, and there's still some effort that does need to go into this. You don't just like plop in a ROM and you're good to go. But what this does is this not only kind of speeds up not so much the process of decompiling, because you're not necessarily doing that, but again, you're able to rip apart a N64 ROM, take the binaries, and as opposed to completely reverse engineering everything, once you get everything kind of situated and set up, you're then able to recompile it and get it done much quicker. So you're not spending years on getting a game from the N64 playable on, let's say, PC. And this is not emulation either. This is running natively on PC if that's going to be your target platform. So as opposed to spending years on that, you could spend hours, days, weeks, something like that. Now there is a N64 Recomp GitHub repository, so if you're wanting to read more on N64 Recompiled or even give it a shot yourself, you can certainly check that out and give it a try there. Like it said in the article, it's available with this as well as Zelda 64 Recompiled. So Zelda 64 Recompiled right now, from what I understand, this one, as it says, is available for Majora's Mask, where you have to bring your own ROM, but they are soon wanting to support Ocarina of Time. And again, some people might be wondering what the difference is with the recompilation and decompilation. Decompilation, you're working with the original ROM, you're reverse engineering that, and you are getting the original machine code from there. The goal is to get the original source code. Then people will take that source code and they can improve upon it, they can port it and do what they want to. Recompiling is going to take the ROM, take the binaries out of it, and be able to recompile those binaries into C code. So as opposed to just getting the raw source code, the original machine code, so to speak, you end up getting the C code, which will be much nicer and easier to work with and recompile. And port, of course. However, keen watchers of this might have noticed, if you've been looking into everything here, that sounded a little bit outdated, because it is here. Because not only there is a recompilation project of Majora's Mask, which is out there, but there's now also a decompilation, which is ready, roll, and complete, called To Ship to Harkinian. I believe that's how I say it here. This here is the sequel to the original one, which was shipped to Harkinian, and that was for Ocarina of Time, where similar to something like the Super Mario 64 decompilation project, you just need to bring your own ROM, you need to have this here, and then it ends up decompiling the ROM into the original source code, which you can then work with, and you can, go edit, tweak to your heart's content, compile a new ROM from that. This here is for Majora's Mask, and we can get more information over on the releases page. So this is not really supposed to be a competitor, because these are two different projects here done two different ways, but you can see here that you can download this right now, at least for macOS, Linux, Steam Deck, or Windows. There have been some tweaks here recently, such as autosaves and pause saves being persistent, autosaving being available on here just in general performance improvements, they say, with some of the newer updates here, which do some other things such as fix crash during Deku King's dance in the end credits, fix many color combiner issues, fix L button not preventing song recognition in combination with D-pad Ocarina. So there's just a few things that will still need to be patched and updated here, but still really love seeing this overall. Now, I don't really get to talk about the Saturn here all too often, but if I do get the opportunity, I like to talk about the Saturn. And the Sega Saturn here end up getting a pretty awesome update over from Memory Fallen here over on Twitter. They said, Rings of Saturn, to celebrate the 26th anniversary of the US release of Burning Rangers, I made a patch that enables 2-player co-op. I have restored this feature, which was featured in early previews but cut during development, more below. And let's take a look at some of the photos right here. So that is the start screen. Looks like there, you got 2 characters, got 2 characters again, and it looks like I've played this game. It's really fun, but you have 2-player available in terms of this. They state here it works. It's kind of between Tails and Sonic Adventure and Tails and Sonic 2 in terms of second player experience. There's some details on the restoration, but they say here's a video that shows 2 players in action, and as you can see right here, it's 2 players who are able to play this co-op. Player 2 will be lead in Mission 1, show you Tillis in Mission 2, opposite of Player 1, Big in Mission 3, show you Tillis in Mission 4, opposite of Player 1. This is dictated by the textures that are simultaneously available in each mission, so kind of just covering that there. Player 2 can put out fires and attack enemies, but can't rescue people or collect crystals. If lost, Player 2 can teleport to Player 1 with A button. I had to enhance this feature to make sure Player 2 didn't get permanently stuck. There were also spots where I had to modify the game code to prevent crashes with 2 players. Example, when you encounter other rangers during cutscenes. I also had to change the game to skip the training level, which doesn't work at all with 2 players. Grab a friend and give it a try. I'll have some more Sonic Team stuff this month. And again, they end up putting up this video right here that showed it in action. Now, they end up doing a pretty cool write-up as well, too, in regards to this. And they're saying here that, again, this was supposed to have 2-player co-op mode, and most of the code for it remains on the disk, and they end up just fixing it and making it functional. You can see some of the early preview images here where it did show 2-player co-op, and now, as you can see, it is available. They do have some more information here in terms of code that was used, decompiling, figuring this out, of course, skipping the training. However, as you can see here, this is, if you've ever wanted to play it, or if you want to play this in 2-player, now you can actually play Burning Rangers in 2-player. Now, this is something we talked about a bit before in a few episodes of ModChat, but this here is the PlayStation Portal, and this image ended up really setting the internet on fire, where you can see here, this is the PlayStation Portal, which I still think this is just an absolutely ugly device. They could have made it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but this just looks like an Android tablet with a PS5 controller that was cut in half, and they end up taking out the touchpad itself and then just glued the 2 halves of the controller to the sides of this tablet. It looks horrible, in my opinion. But either way, we talked about this because this image here, again, set the internet on fire, where it showed that the Flow was able to modify this, which was essentially an Android device with some more lockdown permissions, and they were able to natively run an Android application, which was PPSSPP, which allowed them to then emulate a PSP game, here being the very beginning of Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, to make this device a little more usable. Well, now it states that Hacker the Flow discloses PlayStation Portal exploit for firmwares under 2.06. This again is from Wololo, and they state here when we look at this further, Hacker the Flow has published a proof of concept file for the PlayStation Portal exploit he discussed back in February. As a reminder, Sony patched the bug with firmware 2.06 after disclosure, meaning only PlayStation Portal devices running firmware 2.05 or below are vulnerable to the exploit. The exploit leverages a vulnerability in the device's HEVC decoder. I assume the codec is typically used for streaming from the PS5 to the Portal, which that one surprised me right there, that it was a decoder issue there. But at the time, the developer had showcased PSP emulator PPSSPP running on the hacked PlayStation Portal, but also stated that there was no plan yet at the time for a release and still a lot of work to do. Now, the POC file released today and only appears to show part of the exploit chain, and in particular, the privilege escalation step seems to rely on a specific vulnerability on its Qualcomm SoC. Proof of concept code for that privilege escalation CVE can be found here. That one was patched late last year by Qualcomm, and it's unclear when the fix made its way to the PlayStation Portal. However, it is stated here that the HEVC decoder used in the PlayStation Portal's remote play does not validate the length of elements copied into an array. This results in an out-of-bounds write on the stack and may lead to a RCE. A user who is able to execute this buffer overflow can modify the PlayStation Portal to run arbitrary code. This affects the PlayStation Portal and all other remote play clients, iOS, Android, Windows, and macOS. So that actually, that's a little more important there, I would say. It's additionally stated here, in addition to this buffer overflow, gaps in PlayStation Portal's patching were identified to be vulnerable to a specific CVE, a vulnerability that specifically impacts Qualcomm Arduino GPUs. So when people might be asking what's next or if they should grab a PlayStation Portal, well, I will say here, from what I understand, I think the Flow had talked about this on Twitter. It doesn't seem like there is a way to set up a PlayStation Portal offline, since it's supposed to be just a online device. Also, when you end up getting a PlayStation Portal, when you do the initial setup, in order to really even use it, you have to have an account on there. And in order to get all that set up, you have to connect to the internet, which also does force you to download the latest firmware, which at this point has been patched. So if you go out right now and get a PlayStation Portal and expect to do this right away, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's a way to do that. But they do state here for what's next, there was never a promise of a full-fledged homebrew launcher released on the PlayStation Portal. Whether the Flow's work for this exploit stops with this disclosure, or he has an actual release planned for something more user-friendly is anyone's guess. Notably, the exploit also impacts all other PlayStation remote clients. It is safe to assume those have been patched as well, including iOS, Android, and Windows, which might also explain why the Flow has published this POC under the Google banner this time. It's of course a stretch to go from buffer overflow plus look at this other CVE to I have full control of the system and can install any APK I want, but it is likely that the information disclosed today is enough for Android hackers to pull off something with the PlayStation Portal. If you are on firmware 2.05 or below, it might be worth staying put and not updating. I mean, if you've waited that long on 2.05 already, you're probably not using the device anyway. And now for our final piece of media news, just things of interest that I wanted to cover here. This is from Soundman or JJBA Sound Design over on Twitter. I ended up seeing this one night. I was having a game night with some friends. I was scrolling Twitter a bit, and I ended up seeing this. And I was dying laughing, and I'd watched this multiple times. I was dying laughing. I showed my partner, she was dying laughing from this. I'd showed my friends, and at first they're just like, okay, what is this? I'm like, no, just watch it. Please watch it. And they were dying laughing too. So it's one of those things, some people are probably going to be like, oh, it's not that funny, but to me, it was hilarious. They said here, I replaced the moon in Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks with Quan Chi's big head from the Mortal Kombat 4 arcade cabinet. And it's a 20-second video. We're going to watch this here, right? And let's go ahead. No, we're not doing picture in picture. Let's blow this thing up. There we go. All right. There, let's restart it. So you can see they're running. You have Quan Chi here, and this isn't even the best part, right? Okay, it's still funny to me. He's just floating and staring into subspace. I've gotten most of the laughs out, mind you, but this was absolutely hilarious to me. So that's all there is to it. I did say here, however, I did end up asking, please drop a patch for this. I've laughed way too hard at this. And that's what I would love. I would love for a patch to be dropped to this so I can just apply the patch to the game itself and experience Quan Chi's big head from the Mortal Kombat 4 arcade cabinet in Shaolin Monks. Anyways, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. If you enjoyed this episode, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But typically at the end of these episodes, I like to pick a keyword or a key phrase. And if you've used that keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you've made it to the end. And how about arcade? Let's go ahead and use that for the last topic that I covered. When was the last time you went to an arcade? Do you miss arcade culture? Do you own an arcade cabinet? Are you interested in getting an arcade cabinet? What do you think of that? Let me know by using the word arcade in your comment on the video upload, and I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Anyways, again, as I said, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. Until next time.